Good morning. Thank you guys so much for tuning in on a Saturday. My name is Candace Prince. I am with Green Hope Project. We are very happy to have Deborah Ray here with us. She's going to talk about farming in the desert. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Deborah.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here today. So I have an introduction for myself on my slide, so I'll go ahead and just start sharing. So today I want to talk to you all about farming in the desert, but not so much as like an instructional how-to. There will be some technical information, but I want to share experiences and moments and things that I've captured, especially over the past year throughout 2020, to help cultivate a sense of place and a sense of home in the desert, which is something that is accessible to all of us, whether you grow things outside or whether you just go out for hikes, or however you experience our environment. So a little background about me first. I have a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from New Mexico State University and a Master of Science in Horticulture from Colorado State University. And throughout that time, I was working on small-scale, diversified vegetable farms. I've worked on farms in El Paso, in Las Cruces, and in Fort Collins, Colorado. And currently, I'm the Regional Assistant Manager of the IDEA Farm Program in El Paso, Texas. And I've spent the last year and a half with IDEA launching campus farms, totaling about 1.5 acres over 2 locations, and just working, really closely with the campus to grow food for the students and to engage them in that process as well. So if you have questions about farm to school, I can answer those too, but that's not going to be my main focus today. And overall, just general areas of interest for me are wild foods and foraging, environmental stress factors in the semi-arid West, which is where we are. And even though Colorado is much farther north than we are, it's surprisingly similar in terms of the challenges that they face there and the management approaches that can be taken to grow food. And I'm also interested in the interplay of nature and science and art and culture as well, and how those things all come together to create a sense of belonging in a place. And then finally, watermelons. I studied watermelons in grad school, and there's a picture of me with one of my watermelons there. And I think that they're my favorite fruit and vegetable. So we're going to have 3 main sections today. First, I'm going to talk about knowing your environment, because that's where it really starts, is paying attention and learning about your surroundings. And I'm not going to try and give an overview of every different plant that you'll find or every different insect that you'll see, but we'll talk about some very specific examples in depth so that you can have something to really connect to and find ways of looking at the environment in order to gain that knowledge. And second, I'll be talking about interpreting your environment. So once you know about your surroundings, you can start to understand the interactions and learn lessons from your environment. And then finally, I think the final step is co-creating your environment. So once you know and interpret your surroundings, you can participate in that creative process to make something new using the things that are around you. And that can be done through horticulture, through food, and through art. And I like to use all 3 of those channels in order to channel creative energy and to interact with the environment around me. So first, here are a couple of native plants of the Chihuahuan Desert. And the first one is a small honey mesquite seedling that I'm holding. And honey mesquites are ubiquitous all over the desert and even in non-desert areas. But this is a really historically important crop. Both environmentally and culturally, because the beans of mesquite, the pods actually, have been used by peoples in this area, indigenous peoples, as a source of nutrition. And there's a company here in El Paso called Mesquite Willie's, and I think there are probably other companies as well, but mostly I've been getting mesquite flour from mesquite willies and using it to make baked goods and all kinds of things. And so it's really exciting to be able to use a native plant like that. And it's, really important nutritionally. It's good for balancing blood sugar. And I think it's something that we definitely have an opportunity to reintegrate into our diets. But as far as the ecological significance of honey mesquite mesquites conduct something called hydraulic redistribution. So their root systems, they extend far deep within the soil layers, and they actually can move water from upper soil horizons down to lower soil horizons, and likewise from lower soil horizons to upper soil horizons. So they're kind of channeling water throughout their root system and exuding water at the surface at times to help support life around them. And there's no, real known benefit of doing this to the mesquites themselves. So we're kind of left to conclude that it's doing this for the benefit of plants that are growing around it and the benefit of the environment as a whole, which I think is really beautiful. But this poor mesquite popped up in one of my crop fields, so I went ahead and removed it. I've tried transplanting them, but haven't had any luck with that yet. So in the middle, you'll see another very ubiquitous plant of the Chihuahuan Desert, which is creosote. And this is actually considered to be an invasive plant that's displaced grasslands that were historically in this area. But, now it's part of our landscape, it's part of our ecosystem, and it gives us the beautiful smell of desert rain, along with something called geosmin, which is exuded from algae that's present in the soil. So when that rain hits the creosote and the soil surface, the creosote, releases this fragrant smell, and the geosmins play into that as well to give you that really earthy desert rain smell. And then finally, the third plant I have featured here is ocotillo. So I think that this is a really interesting plant because it's such an opportunist. You'll see throughout the year that it will leaf out and defoliate or drop its leaves multiple cycles throughout the year, depending on the moisture conditions. So it's going to be, using the water that it has when it has it. And whenever those leaves become more of a liability than an asset, whenever they start to lose more water than they can support, they will drop them and then just try again the next time. So we'll move on to another one of my favorite Chihuahuan desert plants, which I think that this is also present in other areas as well. But this is Jimson weed, or Sacred Datura. And this is actually a poisonous / potentially medicinal plant, but probably not one that you want to ingest. But I drove by this plant on my way to work every day for a couple of months last year. And I would be coming to work around sunrise, to get started early on the farm work. And so I got to witness the development of this plant and the flowering cycles and just the way the sunrise, the light would hit it differently every morning. So every now and then I would be an extra 5 minutes late just to stop and take pictures of it. But yeah, it's just so beautiful and such an interesting plant historically as well. So then we also have so many insects around us here in the desert. Here are a couple of key species that I've been, looking at and witnessing over the past year. One of these is a digging wasp. And I wish I could have put the video in here. I couldn't figure out how to do it, but you should see the way that it moves when it, you can see it's digging into that hole, and it uses its legs to, continually dig the soil out to burrow in the sand. And it's a really cool thing to watch. But one of these harvester ants kind of picked up, I don't know if it's exactly the same species, but some species of wasp, and it was trying to carry the head of the wasp back to its nest. And so, I guess even insects have have enemies and sometimes antagonize each other. And then over here on the right, you can see these fig eater beetles, which are really large, and they make a lot of noise when they fly around. They tend to bump into things. And for some reason, there was a whole bunch of them collected on this one plant stem. And so I don't know why they were there. I guess we'll never know exactly why, but I took the opportunity to stop and take some pictures and really, you know, try and take in these really cool bugs. Another thing that you'll see if you spend a lot of time outside here is an amazing array of pollinators. And one of my favorites that I've found is the red-legged oil digger bee. And that's kind of a strange, unexpected name. But these bees actually are adapted to collect oils from flowers, not just pollen or nectar, but the actual oils from the flowers, and to utilize that as well. But just look how fuzzy they are on their back. They're just like big red-eyed teddy bears. And I would see those, you know, returning to the farm over and over again last summer. Up on the top right, there is something that looks kind of like a bee, but it's actually called a carpenter bee robber fly. So this is an example of biomimicry where one insect, or it could be any organism, but it does happen a lot with insects, tend to evolve to look like another insect because it serves them a purpose. So usually they're either antagonizing the insect that they look like, or they're trying to hide from a predator of that insect. So this one in particular does antagonize other bees and pollinators, and tries to steal their homes and their young and everything. So not my favorite insect to see, but it's still just really interesting to witness the adaptation that it has. So these are also, well, I just also want to note that all these pictures, almost without exception, are pictures that I took. So I'm only going to talk about things that I've actually been seeing, especially over the past year, and most especially at the Idea Edgemere farm where I was working every day. So I saw some reptiles and amphibians, a lot of different birds. But one thing that's a little grotesque that I found was this Texas toad over here that had passed away, and it had been cleaned by the ants. So, you know, it became part of that cycle of decomposition and supporting other life forms. But what was left was, you know, this perfectly preserved skeleton of this toad. And so I thought that that was really interesting to see, and also surprising that, you know, amphibians would be found in the middle of the high desert, you know, far from any water source. So I wondered where it came from and how long it had taken to get there. In the middle, you can see one of our desert burrowing owls, and I just love the look on their face. They're just so fascinating and so entertaining to look at. But this one was hiding out underneath a swale in a sidewalk, and it would kind of pop its head out whenever we would walk by. So it kind of kept us company for a while. But over on the right, this was another one of my friends at the farm for a couple of months. And I believe that the two pictures of the lizard are the same individual lizard. I kept seeing one lizard over and over again, and it kind of grew up over the months. And you can tell that it's a male by the blue markings all along its back. And I managed to get some, I think it got comfortable with me eventually because I managed to get some really close-up pictures of it. But this is a side-blotched lizard. And I actually didn't know that we had these lizards in the desert. I never saw them growing up, and I never, you know, saw any resources about them, but they found me out at the farm, and it was exciting to see something new like that. And another one of my favorite organisms is fungi, and I'm not an expert in them, so I'm not going to attempt to give you an ID for each of these. But over the course of the year, as the farm got more established, and there was more water available, more compost, more biodiversity, I started to notice these mushrooms popping up. And to me, whenever I see these, it's a really good sign because you know that you have biodiversity and microbial diversity because, you know, all of these, of course, originated as spores that are part of the microbial diversity in the soil. So, there's something that you can do with mushrooms to kind of learn to identify them in a way that I'll talk about later. But it's just always an interesting encounter. You know, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of species of fungi, and mushrooms are just, you know, one family of fungi. But I just think they're really fascinating and they tell us something about the environment. So next, knowing your environment, it's important to pay close attention to the soil. I wanted to find like a really clear map of the soil types that we have throughout El Paso. I'm sure that it's available somewhere, but I could not find it. So I just included a couple of pictures of soil that I've taken around this area and also outside of the area, but similar to soil types that we have. And so I want you all to start thinking about your perceptions of soil and which of these soils looks like a good soil to grow in and which one looks like not an ideal soil to grow in. And if those judgments are correct and if they actually benefit us. Because you can see on the left, the soil is pretty sandy. It has a few rocks throughout, but it doesn't appear to be too compacted or anything. And we have a lot of that sandy soil up in the higher desert, further away from the Rio Grande, closer to the mountains. And then, of course, it gets progressively rockier and rockier as you get up to the mountainous area of town. And then in the middle, you can see this very cracked, dried soil. And I think that this is kind of a stereotypical image of what you would think of or what someone would present when they're talking about like a barren desert wasteland, you know. But this is actually a really good and easy to grow in soil. It is a sandy clay loam, so it has all three of the components of soil, all three of the soil particles, sand, silt, and clay. And the reason that it shrinks and swells like this is because of the clay content. And that shrinking and swelling as it hydrates and as it dries, that's what leads to this cracked appearance. And if you didn't know better, you might kind of misjudge the potential of that soil. But we have soils, this picture was taken in Colorado, but we have soils like this closer to the Rio Grande, all throughout the valley, and my house being one of those locations as well. So that's one of the reasons that I moved to the valley, because I wanted to be close to a soil like this and get to grow in it in my own backyard. And then finally on the right, you can see a very sandy soil, just pure sand basically. And a lot of people have negative feelings about sand, I think, because it's, you know, it dries out so quickly, it can blow away, it gets in your eyes when it's windy, it gets really hot. And I think that we kind of miss out on learning about the soil in a way that empowers us to manage it properly. So if you have an incredibly sandy soil, you're not going to have some of the problems that you might have with a clay soil. Yes, water is going to filter through quickly, but you're not going to have problems with water logging or with your plants drowning or missing out on oxygen while they're growing in the soil. And you are going to have to give small bits of fertilizer or small bits of compost pretty frequently, but you're not going to have as many issues with nutrient buildup because those nutrients are going to leach out of that soil pretty quickly. And a clay soil, on the other hand, I've heard a lot of people complain about clay soil too, but it just presents different opportunities. You can water less frequently, you can fertilize less frequently, but of course you have to make sure that you have proper drainage, proper aeration, and in both of these soils, you definitely want to focus on adding organic matter. That's going to be key in balancing the structure of the soil to make it ideal for supporting plant growth. So next we have some just other curiosities that I've found over the past year. Two examples here. On the left, you can see this wildflower has kind of an unusual growth coming out of it. And, you know, I should have put a picture of what the flower is supposed to look like, but the way it looks here, I think that it's been impacted by some kind of phytoplasma or a genetic mutation where something has happened at the genetic level to make this flower develop incorrectly, to trigger a different pattern of growth than what is typical and what is productive for like producing seeds and, you know, pollination and achieving the purposes of the flower. But this was just, you know, growing on the side of one of the fields. I don't think it was related to anything surrounding it in the environment that triggered this, just kind of like a genetic fluke. But these are the types of things that you can see if you're in an area for a long period of time. If you spend a lot of time looking at the little details around you, you find these things that, you know, just make you pause and think about what could have happened and how these things actually work. In the middle, or well, off to the right first, this is a plant or a member of the category of parasitic higher plants that's called dodder, and that's D-O-D-D-R, or D-O-D-D-E-R. And this is considered to be a plant, but it does not contain chlorophyll. And that's kind of one of the main things that we think about when we think about plants is they're green, they photosynthesize. But dodder does not do this. Dodder is a vining plant. It's part of the morning glory family. And it has these, you know, small kind of like vining structures that act as straws that can pierce the plants that they are growing on top of. So they're growing into the plants that they're growing on, and they're taking away those photosynthates, those sugars and carbohydrates, and they're sustaining themselves through the life of the plant that they're growing on. So it's a true parasite. And this is another thing that I would see on my drive to work every day. And I just noticed this dodder, these mats of dodder was just expanding across the desert. And so you can see in the middle, my car kind of for scale, and all of the yellow areas that you can see are just mats of dodder. And so I kind of witnessed that develop and stopped to take some pictures as well, because it's, you know, a really interesting organism. It's considered to be a weed. It's not something that you would necessarily want in your garden, but it just has just these amazing characteristics that, you know, also make you stop and think. So another thing, I just looked at the time. It's already 11:30, so I'm going to start progressing through this a little more quickly. Another thing to witness is the way the seasons unfold here in El Paso. We know that it's not always hot and dry all the time. And in 2020, one of the really nice things that happened early in the year was the amazing poppy bloom that we had in March. I didn't see nearly as many of them this year, and so that was something really special to participate in. But in order to witness those things, you have to be really paying attention to the weather and, you know, how things start to develop in the early spring. And I think we had a pretty wet spring, so that probably contributed as well. In the middle, you know, you can see that as the spring progresses, we come into our windy season. We get these dust devils that, you know, blow all over the desert that, you know, coat your skin and definitely sandblast small plants that are trying to start growing. But then eventually we progress into our monsoon season. And we haven't had a very heavy one for the past couple of years, but it's just a breath of fresh air when it does happen. And there are plants that are specially adapted to complete their entire life cycle during this monsoon season. So it's something really beautiful to witness. So whenever you're trying to start growing things in the desert, you're going to start encountering weeds. And I put weeds in quotations because, some weeds are really wildflowers, some of them are native plants, some of them are invasive and, truly noxious and not something that you want growing. But I wanted to show you some pictures of goat heads. And if you've grown up here, you probably know what I'm talking about. But something that I found out that I didn't know before was that there are actually two different kinds of weeds that are referred to as goat heads. One of them is a grass family weed that's also called field sandbur. And you can see that small picture in my hand, or that small picture of my hand holding a field sandbur with the grass seedlings starting to germinate out of it. And another weed that's also called goat head is this one that I'm holding on the left, where there's actually 5 individual seeds that are joined together that kind of look like a star or a flower. But when you separate them apart, they have these horns that do kind of look like goat heads. And that's obviously why they're called that. But definitely 2 weeds that you don't want in your garden, regardless of what you call them. But over on the right, I wanted to show you a picture of silverleaf nightshade. This is a really interesting weed to me because you can see the flower. There's 2 pictures of purple flowers, and they look nearly exactly the same. But the one in the picture with the plant is the silverleaf nightshade weed, and the flower by itself is actually an eggplant flower. So these are both in the nightshade family, along with tomatoes and potatoes and peppers, and they look very, very similar. And another thing about this weed is that the berries, those yellow small berries that develop, actually contain something that's been used to curdle cheese in the past instead of rennet from animals. So this weed, it's spiny, it can take over your garden, but it does have a use, and it's something that it's also very beautiful to see. So now we're going to move on to interpreting your environment. There are endless things that you can learn about your surroundings, but once you get even just one piece of really intimate knowledge about your surroundings, you can start to have that interpretation where you understand why things are a certain way, or how it affects the other things around it, or what it can tell you about nature, or even about life in general. So we'll talk about giving the land a chance, life cycles, leverage points, attention and love, and lessons that we can learn from the desert. So first, my biggest piece of advice out of all this would be to give the land a chance to show you what it's capable of. The first farm that we started at Edgemere is out near East Montana. The soil has a lot of caliche. It was very compacted. And I was, most people were very surprised when I would tell them that we were starting a farm there. And in the beginning, I was a little skeptical myself, but I knew that, it was something that I had to see through and just start trying to plant things, start amending the soil, start planting seeds, and observe the outcome instead of just assuming that nothing is going to grow. So there was one patch in the field that was much sandier and much looser, and I got a carrot out of that part of the field that was over 2 feet long, which really, really impressed me. And you can see on the right these beautiful long straight carrots as well that might have been more difficult to grow them that nice in a heavy clay soil. So even though it was very rocky in most areas, there's always some area that you can find where you'll find a plant and a place that are adapted to each other, and that you can have the result that you're hoping for. So another aspect of interpretation, or another thing to witness while you're growing things or whenever you're out hiking, is the life cycles that are around you. These two, the photo in the middle and the photo on the left, are both pictures of carrots, but not carrots at a normal time where we would grow them and harvest them. On the left is a carrot that had been, growing off to the side, not very close to water, left out way past its prime. But you can see how, the smaller roots, not the main taproot, the fine roots started to develop more, and it continued to grow. And just, I don't know, it looks really interesting to me. I mean, it's kind of ugly, but it just is something that you wouldn't see if you hadn't taken it upon yourself to grow a carrot yourself, and leave one there and see what happens. And if you leave it there long enough, you'll end up with carrot flowers, which is the picture in the middle. And most of the time when I tell the kids, hey, did you know that's actually a carrot? They don't believe me. They didn't know what a carrot flower looked like. And neither would we if we only just followed the prescriptive pattern of growing things for a certain amount of time, harvesting them all at the same time, and not letting nature take its course so that we can observe that full life cycle. And who knows, we might even get carrot seeds out of this that we can plant again the next year. And on the right, I wanted to show you all one of my favorite insects, which is the tarantula hawk wasp. And it's the state insect of New Mexico. I'm sure that most of you have heard of it, but it's definitely very intimidating. It has a very painful sting. It's very large, and it has a very strong presence, and you can hear it when it starts to fly by you. But I found one that had passed away, and it was pretty small, so I was surprised to see it dead. But one thing that I want you all to notice is the wings. And, it's possible that the wings started to degrade after it had died. But I also have learned that flying insects will kind of fly their wings to tatters. So they kind of go through this aging process just like humans do. And they're, using up every last bit of functionality out of their bodies before they finally finish their life cycle. So I wish I could show a video of how these insects move as well. The way that they crawl around when they're landed is really fascinating as well. And so real quick, I want to touch on leverage points, because once you know about your environment, you can start to see all of the elements of it as leverage points that you can impact in some way to get a desired result, whether that's with a garden or a landscape plant or, wildlife that's around you. And so these leverage points would be the soil, the texture of the soil, how much water is around, what the surrounding plants are, because the surrounding plants are going to impact a microclimate, the specific environment that's around whatever you're trying to grow. And so, and the air as well, it's going to impact humidity if you have other plants growing around, and that's going to make the environment more conducive to certain crops and less conducive to others. So if you approach all these things with curiosity, you can see more potential in learning to alter your surroundings and create that leverage. So here I have some unusual photos, but I just wanted to touch on the way that we connect to our surroundings as an act of love. And, when we think about things that we love, those are things that we are inspired and motivated to pay attention to. But I think that it kind of works both ways, where if you stop and take the time to give attention to something, you'll start to love it as well. So these are just some moments that I've captured. On the left, you can see a small onion seedling, and it was on a really foggy day, which I think was one of the only foggy days we had last year. But there was a spider web that had been woven overnight and dew that had collected. And I just thought that was something really special to witness and something I was really, thankful to see. And then in the middle, right after a frosty day, right after a freezing night, we had a lot of frost in the morning, and it just collected in these most amazing ice crystals on this broccoli leaf. And you can see this broccoli leaf is discolored. It's kind of reddish. And so that tells us that it has a phosphorus deficiency. But that's not ideal for crop production, but it created something beautiful, even though it technically was suffering from a disorder. And then on the far right, you can see some watermelons that I had to cull because of wildlife damage, and some of them were cut in half. And over the months, instead of fully breaking down, they kind of had a dried layer across the top of them. And eventually, the areas where the seeds grow all along the cross section of the watermelon kind of caved in, and you can see all the moisture that's collected inside the watermelon. And it was just an incredible color and something so unusual to see. And it's capturing things like that make me feel the most close to my surroundings and the most at home with nature, because that you're really a part of all of it. You're really seeing every aspect. And here's another plant that I really spent a lot of time with over the last year that I never knew about before last year, which is woolly Titystromia. And this plant was growing beside one of my fields, and it was just the most amazing thing to me to see this plant growing, because it started out so small and green and tender, and over the months, it just grew larger and larger, and it just never stopped growing, and it had all of these insects that were attracted to it, and it started to grow this fuchsia color. And it wasn't really near any water source, and it didn't have large showy flowers or anything, but it was just so overflowing with life. And it was just, it really kept me company every day when I would see it. I tried to collect some seeds from this plant, but I don't know how they'll do. I haven't planted them yet, but this was just another one of my favorites from the year. So here I have a little poem that I wrote that I'll read about lessons that I've learned from spending this time close with the desert. So, the desert values no judgment, casts no shame, makes no apology, takes no blame. The desert manifests all things in vastness, unknown but open, dry and still alive, exposed yet protected, bare and abundant. The desert fears no loneliness, avoids no pain, begs no company, refuses to be tamed. The desert exists in courage, unbridled effort, hope without expectation, utter honesty, persistent transformation. And you can see a prickly pear that I had growing in a pot, and it was in one spot for a couple of years, and the roots bursted out of that plastic pot and started growing into the soil. So just that determination and that perseverance and the lack of limitation of desert plants, it just is really inspiring to me. I think we have a lot to learn from them. So finally, I'll try and go through all of this in 5 minutes because I do want to leave some time for questions. I want to talk about co-creating your environment and bringing in that participation piece and that personal element where you're, taking what you have around you and making something new. So I'm glad that I hope that these slides will all be shared because I don't think I have time to go through all the specific details anymore, but if you're co-creating your environment from a horticultural approach and you're trying to grow things, these are some of the amendments and fertilizers that I've had success with over the past year. This Dr. Earth fruit tree fertilizer, this multi-mineral foliar applied fertilizer, worm castings, fish hydrolysate, and of course, compost. Lots and lots of compost from New Green Organics. Shout out to them. And so whenever you're trying to start seeds at home for the first time, there are so many options for seeds that you can buy, but I think that we shouldn't take the seed company claims too seriously or think that, oh, because it doesn't say it's drought tolerant, it's not going to grow well here. That's not necessarily true. So I'd encourage you to just take a shot at whatever you're interested in growing. And I've seen a lot of people starting to grow seeds in front of a window. And I think that that can work, but ideally you want a south-facing window. This window has indirect light, and that's not really ideal for vegetable crops because, you know, we can germinate vegetable crop seeds directly out in the soil. And so they're used to that direct full sunlight. And so I would recommend, you know, don't hesitate to plant things directly in the soil. And if you have a raised bed, like a planter, try and put it in a place where there's soil beneath it as well, and not just that 6 to 12 inches inside the raised bed, because that's going to give you more success and more temperature stability in the soil over time. And here's a couple of crops that I think will work well, are pretty consistent, not necessarily the highest yielding, but things that are fun to grow at home, nice to have fresh, and tend to be pretty reliable. And so you can see these green onions grew through some rocks and mulch that were in the soil, so they were pretty hardy. Summer squash, of course. Cherry tomatoes, if you're going to grow tomatoes, I think cherry tomatoes are the most foolproof. And then sugar snap peas as well. Like I said, not high yielding, but really fun to grow and does pretty well in our conditions. I forgot how much I had left, so I'll still try to keep a good pace here. There are lots of wild plants all around us that we can eat in the desert that you might not expect. One of them is yucca, and many people probably already know that you can eat yucca flowers, but I've been doing it pretty regularly and I really enjoy them. I think that they're easy to identify, easy to find, and easy to incorporate into like a salad or a taco or a dessert or something with that can use that fresh, crispy garnish. And another plant that I really like to use that you can find growing in the wild is curly dock. And you use the leaves, and you ideally want to find the leaves before the plant starts flowering. But once it does start flowering, it makes a really beautiful bouquet. But there were a lot of these growing last year when we had that really wet early spring. I haven't seen so many growing this year, but look up curly dock and keep your eyes out because it's a nice wild green to be able to use. Another plant that's really near and dear to me is devil's claw. And you can find these seed pods. I actually have one in my hand right here. You can find them out in the desert, and usually they'll have seeds inside of them that you can harvest. And they produce these beautiful flowers, and these seed pods, when they're green, they look like the photo in the middle. And then you can can them, or you can boil them and then saute them. And they're pretty similar to okra. I would say a cross between green beans and okra. And so they're a little mucilaginous like okra as well, so you can use them the same way. But it's one that's really fun to grow that you can also buy seeds for if you can't find them. Another thing that we can grow really well here is fruit trees. I featured peaches here because peaches do particularly well, and I think one of the reasons for that is that they have those narrower, longer leaves that have that fold, and it almost makes them like more aerodynamic, because I notice when we get the wind storms and the sandstorms, it doesn't, the peach trees don't get damaged as much as the apple trees and the pear trees do. And they don't get as many nutrient deficiencies as well. In the middle, you can see a picture of one of the apple trees that we had planted, and it has that interveinal chlorosis, that yellowing and that pattern that's usually indicative of an iron deficiency or some other micronutrient deficiency. So that's something to look out for on your fruit trees as well. And then, of course, pomegranates. We grow a lot of pomegranates in this area. There's a pomegranate farm, I think, in Tornillo that does really well. And so you can try growing those at home too. And then, of course, there's no limit to the artistic inspiration that you can find in the environment around you when you're really paying attention. So on the left, this is a spore print from some mushrooms that I found. And that's what I was talking about before with even if a mushroom's not edible or you don't know if it's safe to eat, this is something that you can do to kind of have that interaction and gain that information from that small piece of nature. So to take a spore print, you just remove the cap, you put it on a piece of paper, you cover it with glass so that it has some humidity, and then within 24 hours, it naturally releases all those spores. And sometimes they come out in unexpected colors, and that color can be an indicator for identification for you. And then in the middle, there's lots of pieces of wood like this lying around all over the desert, especially in areas where they're starting to do construction and earthwork. You can find these pieces and find new ways to appreciate them. And whenever you spend a lot of time with a plant or with anything really, you become so attuned to the details, it becomes really easy to draw them or to paint them because you know them so well. So that's just another benefit of spending time with something. And then, of course, like I said, the options are endless. This is kind of a rabbit hole that I have gone down recently where I'm seeing all of these very minute details in the environment and thinking, ooh, that would make a cool fabric. That'd be a cool print. We could arrange that in a way to make it something that you might never realize where it originated, but it just has these beautiful colors and patterns that you can incorporate into, decor or artwork or clothing or whatever you want. And then, of course, food. And I wish I had more time to spend on this one, but, this is one of my favorite recipes to make, which is calabacitas. And I'll give you the recipe on the next slide. But these are all of the plants that have gone into this dish. And all these plants are, they're tied to an environment. They're tied to a specific growing season. They're tied to the people who have produced them. And they're tied to a method of production and a method of preparation. And somehow, once you add all those things together, they're not just plants anymore. And it's not just food anymore. It's culture and it's identity. So here is my recipe, which is from my dear, dear friends, Megan and Danielle, for New Mexican calabacitas. So I won't talk through this. I think this is my last slide. So I'll leave it up so that you all can write it down if you want while we're answering questions. But with that, I'll wrap everything up.
Oh my gosh, that's so much great information. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm happy to share.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh my gosh, and recipes too. I didn't know that was going to happen. Cool.
It's a bonus.
Yeah, so we've had pretty respectful audiences. And so if anybody would like to ask questions or make comments, you can go ahead and unmute, and you're free to contribute. Somebody says screenshot, laugh out loud. Okay. So if anybody has any questions or comments for Deborah, go ahead and unmute and go for it.
Hi, I'm Jenny, or JT is usually what I sign in for. And I just want to thank you so much for the creativity. I didn't really ever grasp the concept. I mean, I did with the earthship aspect of stuff, but I loved the mushroom print art that you did with the mushrooms that were growing. And I guess the question that I would have for you, if you were somebody trying to start a food oasis in the Chihuahuan Desert, what would be some advice that you would give me?
Yeah. So would this be with primarily wild plants or like common fruits and vegetables?
You know what? I would love to do more native to our environment here. I'm all about the native growing species and stuff like that. So I don't want to do what everybody else is doing. I want to put what the Chihuahuan Desert offers us and provides for us so that people can start learning the wild edibles we can grow that are native to us and make them look beautiful here in El Paso County.
Yeah, yeah, I'm definitely on the same page with you there. I would, if I were you, I would look for a piece of land that already has a lot of that native biodiversity. It already has cacti and yuccas, mesquites and everything growing. And then you can kind of expand upon that and plant additional individuals of those species and start to build the species diversity as well. And definitely implement some rainwater harvesting. And you can use the contour of the land. We have an expert in this locally, Mike Gaglio, who helps a lot of people route water where it needs to go to maximize the benefit of it. And so I think that implementing that would kind of help ensure that all that life is supported in a concentrated area. But that's a big question and a big concept that I'd love to talk more with you about.
Sure. Can I leave you my information, or can I give you, or how do I get in touch with you?
Well,
because I'm starting a nonprofit to do this.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so exciting. Well, I just advanced the slide and my email address is on there. Will that work for you?
Yes, definitely, because I do want to implement earthworks because I'm very much about permaculture. So
Awesome. That's great.
Okay, I'll relinquish I'll put myself on mute.
Okay.
Oh,
thank you.
and yeah, everybody else copy that down, take your screenshot, whatever you need to, if you'd like to get with her one-on-one. And Mike is with High Desert Native Plants, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. We have a question in the chat from Valeria Rios. It said, would a lemon tree grow in a really sandy sand?
Well, citrus is difficult. I think more so, well, equally because of the soil and because of the temperatures that we get here. If you have a lemon tree that's cold hardy, like a Meyer lemon, and it's in a sheltered area where you can cover it if you need to, if things get really cold, you should be able to grow it in a sandy soil, but you have to monitor the moisture consistently. And when you're planting it, you want to incorporate a lot of organic matter to help with that moisture retention. And also, keep track of the nutrient deficiencies related to pH as well.
Okay, good advice. Anybody else have any questions or comments for Deborah?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I wanted to ask where exactly, well, you don't have to give me exactly, but out on the east side, you said there's a farm?
Yes, yeah. There's a campus farm at Idea Edgemere that's 1 acre, and we're just now launching a second farm that's 1/2 acre at Idea Horizon Vista.
Okay, because years ago, oh gosh, it's been a while, I lived out in the Red Sands area.
Mm-hmm.
I had a 50 by 50 garden. Tomatoes loved that sand.
Awesome.
Just went crazy. My husband was eating them like apples every day.
Amazing.
They were just awesome. I have nothing but good things to say about that sand that's out there, the coarse sand.
Mm-hmm.
It is great stuff. So I really do appreciate how you brought up the fact that sand shouldn't be ignored. So
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that. And thank you. What else can we contribute to your little farm? Like some seed that we know works well out here?
Yeah, definitely. The campus itself, Idea Public Schools, they can receive donations and then pass those along to us to use at the farm.
Okie doke. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
So, if you are shy, I'm sure she wouldn't mind hanging back a little bit at the end when we stop recording, but, or otherwise you can email her. But thank you so much for this. This is really awesome. And I love that it's very specific to our region because, sometimes you talk about, hey, gardening in Sweden, and it's like, it's not the same.
Right.
This is really cool. But unless there's any other comments or questions, Deborah, thank you so much for doing this and sharing your knowledge. I think that that's how we're going to grow and progress as a community, by sharing what we each know and then collaborating.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for your time.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.
All right. Thank you guys. Have a great weekend. Don't forget, subscribe to our newsletter. We're also doing an essay contest where you could actually win a trip to Taos, New Mexico to learn how to build earthships for 4 weeks. So if you're not sure what that is, go check it out. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.